Sure. Yep. Yeah, picture. All right. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're going to give everyone a couple more minutes to file in. We're going to be live premiering episode 2 of Tap Talks. Make sure you stick around afterwards. We're going to have a live Q&A. The group here is going to be sipping, drinking beer with you, answering the questions live. Take a look at the chat box to the right. You can type in questions at any point during the event while they're coming up. If we can reply in the chat box, we'll do that. If we have to, we'll address it live afterwards. So hopefully you have a good time with us. Hopefully you guys have some of the beer we're drinking. Well, not myself, but everyone else is drinking the beer from Tilted Mash that we sampled during the recording. So hopefully it's tasty. What do you got there, Jesse?
I got the Sip and Spree.
What do you got, Chase?
A cream ale.
The parental
responsibility cream ale.
Is it good? Talk to me about
Yeah, smooth. Like it. Nice and mellow.
it. All right. So we'll give everyone a couple more minutes to get in here. If you want, let us know where you're watching from. Let us know if you're sampling any beer that we might need to check out in the future. Oh, I see Martin Nevezi's on here. Thanks for joining us, bud. Mary's on here. My son Boston's on here, so thanks for the support, buddy. Rico, thanks for joining us. Tony's on here from Dallas. Thanks for joining us, Tony. Hey, Dustin, let's go ahead and get started right now. I know we got the intro anyway, so let's get this rolling, and we'll be back here after the video is over. We'll see you soon. Hey everybody, welcome to Tap Talks. Our mission here is to educate the industry, so we're doing that by bringing together industry experts and also introducing a little fun by bringing in some microbreweries. We're here today at Tilted Mash Brewing in Elk Grove, California. I'm Kenny Blakeslee, the CEO of Pulse Signal Solutions, and I'm here with my 2 cohorts. You guys want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'm Jesse Friedman. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Pulse Signal Solutions, and I'm here representing my customers to make sure this thing doesn't get a little bit too techy.
I'm Greg Glenn, the DAS doctor, and also CTO at Pulse Signal Solutions. I'm here to bring the geek side, try to keep these guys technically in line.
Thanks for doing that, Greg. Today we're going to be bringing together something we don't think has ever been done, not that we've seen anyways. Today we're going to be bringing together FCC licensees and fire code officials to get to the bottom of why is there a rift out there in the market between these two? Why are systems being deployed that aren't approved by one side or the other? Where is this disconnect coming from? How can we help solve that problem? And if you're watching this live with us, make sure you use the chat box. We're here to answer your questions live. We're here for you. We want to be of service. So make sure you engage with us. Let's make this fun. All right, guys, let's get into the fun stuff. Let's bring Jonathan out. Hey, Jonathan, why don't you get us our first beer? Tell us what we're drinking on.
All right, guys. Today we have our flagship cream ale called Parental Responsibility.
Nice.
It's a nice, easy drinking cream ale. So.
And why'd we name it that?
Well, we name it that because, sometimes when you're a parent, you need something very light.
Cheers. Cheers.
I'm jealous right now. You might notice there's only 2 beers being poured today. I'm on the 75 hard challenge, much like I was during first Tap Talks, but I failed because I was trying to fake drink the beer and it tastes too good once it hits your lips, so I ended up drinking it. So this time I'm right in the middle of it. I'm not going to give in. I'm going to let these guys do the drinking today, but I'll be back in action for episode number 3, so look forward to the fun there. If you're following along at home, this is the beer that we shipped you right here that you're going to want to be cracking. Parental responsibility. Get started with us. Let's get right into the meat and the potatoes, huh? Hey, we promised y'all something you've never seen before, something pretty unique, and that's what we're going to deliver for you today. Today we've got Chief Perdue from the Safer Buildings Coalition and Nathan Hinkle from the Sacramento Regional Radio Communications Shops. What we're talking about today is public safety communications and specifically making that work inside of buildings. So we want to know a little bit more about what we're seeing out in the field when it comes to new construction, tenant improvements, et cetera. Fire code says one thing, there's some laws that say something else. It's getting confusing out there. We want to make sure that we're bringing these communities together, make sure we're educating everybody, and making sure we're tying this ecosystem together so that we ensure seamless solutions and seamless communications in every building in America. First off, Chief, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name's Alan Perdue. I'm a former fire chief and currently serve as the executive director of the Safer Buildings Coalition. And our focus as an industry group is to make sure public safety, police, fire, and EMS can communicate inside buildings.
Okay, all right. And what about a little bit of your history? What was the capacity you served under in your fire years?
Sure, I started out, in the fire service many years ago, and I'm probably in my 40th year of working in the public safety arena. And through my career, I had the opportunity to work both on a state and a national level with code development. And a lot of my roles and responsibilities in helping develop fire codes and standards that help first responders do their job, like the one that applies to emergency responder communications enhancement systems, and often referred to as an ERRCS. So, honored to be here and work with you guys and help get a message out about the critical piece of communications, both behind the scenes and inside buildings.
Yeah, we've spent some time together and we've gone over the importance of these systems. And I know there's definitely some case studies and some stories that are actually pretty horrible when you really start to get into them, of things that have happened when communications have broken down inside of buildings, when first responders are trying to respond to emergencies, and communications becomes a critical element when time is of the essence, for sure. So looking forward to getting into some of those subjects. Thanks, Chief. Nathan Hinkle, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself for us?
Yes, sir. Hey, thank you for having me here today. I do appreciate this opportunity also to speak with you and to speak with former Chief Perdue there. My name is Nathaniel Hinkle. I work for the County of Sacramento, California. I am the Telecommunications System Supervisor for the Sacramento County Regional Radio Communication System. And we operate a system that maintains communications for our public safety first responders. Our system has about 18,000 users on it. Many of them are primary paying users. Many of them are secondary users to allow for operability or interoperability between the different agencies. My job, I feel, is extremely important. And if first responders can't communicate, then they can't do their jobs. They can't feel safe. And that is my top priority, both in building and out of the building. So that's pretty much a quick summation of my career.
Well, I think it's pretty obvious we have two experts here today, so I'm looking forward to the conversation and to help and bring some solutions to some of the problems that we at least are seeing out there in the field. And Nathan, as the licensee, as the spectrum holder, where does your responsibility lie when it comes to first responder communication systems?
I think as a licensee, I am held to a certain set of standards that are specified by the Federal Communications Commission under Part 90-219. And Part 90-219 mandates that I'm responsible for any retransmission or transmission use of those radio frequencies as the licensee. So when it comes to first responders, I provide a trunked radio system, or several trunk radio systems in my case, that all tie into a central core. But all these frequencies need to be controlled and managed by the licensee or the frequency licensee holder. And, I need to make sure that my frequencies are used properly in accordance with the rules and regulations. And, we provide the best communications that we possibly can for our first responders to ensure that they have that coverage in and out of buildings and on the street level. So that's primarily a description of what I do.
So from a contractor's point of view or construction point of view, a lot of my customers and myself coming from a different industry, really coming in here, I just don't understand how that relates to fire code. And, so when we have bid come out, it comes down the pipe, it comes through the consultant, through the GC, EC, gets to us, and, really we know about what the code is and what the fire code is and what we need to meet. And then all of a sudden, now I'm getting told that there's a licensee or FCC component to that. I'm not sure where that comes from. So how do they relate?
Yeah. So as a contractor or a vendor coming into the county, usually you'll be bidding on an RFP or an RFB, depends on what you're assigned or asked to do, to design a BDA in a building to provide coverage for first responders.
All right, hold on one second, real quick. What's a BDA?
So a BDA is called a bidirectional amplifier. It's also referred to as an ERRCS. What the device does is it takes a certain set of frequencies, that usually those frequencies, in my case, by the licensee, and rebroadcast them over the air out to one of our sites and vice versa back in. It's almost, the best way to describe it is as a repeater. It just enhances the signal coverage, in this case, in building communications. It takes the signal from the fireman or the police officer that's in the building, it amplifies that signal and shoots it back out to our sites. Then our sites will be rebroadcasting that transmission and back into the BDA and down into the first responder in the building. It just enhances that communication.
Okay.
So in the end, to kind of start to sum this up, what we've got is we've got first responders, and maybe we'll throw it to Chief here in a second. We've got first responders, we got firefighters out there, we got police officers, paramedics probably, that they use two-way radios to communicate, right? And so we've got Spectrum, and we got a radio shop. We're going to kick around a bunch of terms here, so somebody call me out if I'm using them incorrectly here. But we've got someone like Nathan, who he runs this system. It's a network that's citywide, it's region-wide, whatever it is. This is a communications network that allows two-way radios for our first responders and public safety officials to operate on. And then, so he's responsible for that spectrum and for the performance of that network. Then you have the folks that are actually operating on it, right? So it works outdoors, everybody's happy, then they go inside of a building, and now all of a sudden, communication starts to break down. This could be for a number of different reasons. It could be because of building construction. It could be because the network was designed to function outdoors. It wasn't designed to function indoors, and so you're going to have some dead spots. That's where it creates danger for guys like Chief and some of his colleagues, right? So that's where that BDA comes into, where that's a solution to amplify it throughout the building. Greg's probably chomping at the bit here because I'm kind of stepping on his toes. He probably wants to correct me on plenty of stuff, but it's a solution to amplify those signals, which fire code officials want, right? They want to know that their first responders are going to be safe inside of buildings. And let's be honest here, so does the radio shop. They want to make sure. So, in the end, they work for the first responders. They're the ones that are that's why that network is there. So they want it to work as well. Hey, Chief, in your long and illustrious career, you've been all up and down the chain of command. You've led men and women inside of buildings, and you've had to run inside there yourself under the leadership of others. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about how critical it is for firefighters and other first responders to have a communication system that's functioning when they go inside of a building for an emergency?
Certainly, one of the most critical pieces of equipment we carry, whether you're a firefighter, law enforcement, or paramedic, is that land mobile radio, that portable radio. And when you enter a structure, that's your lifeline to the outside. That makes the difference whether you're going to be able to call for help or not call for help. And for many years, we've had a problem of communicating inside buildings. But after the events of 9/11, it was really brought to light about the ability to communicate. And, the 343 brothers we lost in that horrible event and many others in many other events, we realized there's a solution to the problem today. So back in 2009, we were able to get some code language into the fire code that required that solution inside buildings that had difficulty communicating. And that's been modified over the years, and where we are today with many new buildings and in some areas existing buildings requiring a solution inside a building to solve that critical communications piece so that we can save lives of our first responders, but also save the lives of the public we're there to protect.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think now we're kind of getting to that timeline of how things have gone, right? So there was a problem. They said, hey, we need a solution. How do we prevent this from happening? So the fire code was written and it said, hey, listen, you've got to deploy a solution. If first responders go inside of your building and they can't communicate, essentially, right, you're not allowed to be inside that building. You're not going to get a certificate of occupancy or anything like that if first responders can't communicate inside your building. So it laid out some rules, it laid out some things. But
so how did the FCC get involved? I mean, where did that come in?
Well, I think this is where we're going with it, right? Greg, you want to talk about that?
Well, and this is the thing. That's what I was explaining. We said we got to get from point A to point B, right? We can walk, but if you're not going to walk, you're going to use a helicopter. And we're going to use a helicopter in all cases. So, but that helicopter has some requirements upon it. Number one, the FAA says you got to be a pilot to fly it. So now, Jesse, I can't give you the authority to fly a helicopter, just like I can't give you the authority to operate a BDA outside of the federal rules on doing that. You or the licensee may look at this and say, well, it's better for me to drive from point A to point B because I only got to go a mile. But what we've done is we've painted a large picture that uses one solution out of many. And in my mind, what we've done is we've looked at the problem from a building has a problem rather than a ecosystem that says we have an infrastructure problem. And the communication systems are, in my mind, the same thing as the sewer system, as your water system, as the telephone system. You can't just arbitrarily put a radio in a box and say, make it work. That's why I might go back to Nate here and have him
I'd
talk
like to
about.
throw it to Jesse right now. I want him to just decode for me what you said, because I don't know if you picked up on that at all. Jesse, tell me what he just said, because when you started talking about helicopters and I got lost, Greg. No, I love it, Greg.
No,
Greg, let's
no.
unpack it a little bit. That's what I
Yeah,
want to do.
yeah, no.
So what you're saying about a helicopter, right, is that you got to get from point A to point B. Helicopters are there. You can't just go hop into a helicopter and go fly it, right? Somebody has to authorize the use of that helicopter. No matter what anybody else tells you
Right.
about, this will get you from point A to point B. There's still somebody else that regulates
Right.
that helicopter
being
and
able
the
to jump
usage
in
of
and
it,
do
right?
it.
So,
Right.
so that in that case, and now here we go with acronyms, right? That's the FAA.
Right.
What we're talking about is the FCC, the Federal.
Communications Commission.
There we go.
Yep.
So right there, you're saying that the FCC, because there's we've got a BDA. This is an idea from how to get from point A to point B, like you said. Communication doesn't work. It will work if you put a BDA in, theoretically. A bidirectional amplifier, like we said.
Well, signal booster as defined by the FCC.
So now the fire code is happy, fire officials are happy, first responders are happy, because they're saying we install these systems. Everybody knows they have to install it per the fire code. Now our communications will work. Where does the problem start up? Where does that come from, Greg? Or I
Then there we go. Instead of the FAA for flight, now we got the FCC coming in. Whoa. Nathan.
Yeah, exactly. So this starts to happen. Fire officials start to mandate this, and people start to install these systems. A whole lot of people that think it's just, and slap a signal booster in, the signal works inside the building, right? Nathan, maybe you can talk me through, I'm sure you've experienced some horror stories. What can potentially happen when someone that doesn't know what they're doing comes in and just starts rebroadcasting signals all willy-nilly?
Well, I can tell you from firsthand experience, as well as many other systems administrators like myself, if a BDA is installed improperly, it literally can take down our system, the entire system. This happens all the time across the country where BDAs are installed improperly, and it interferes with the public safety communication system. And as a licensee or the FCC license holder, I'm responsible to make sure that that doesn't occur. And so the communication needs to be very policy driven between the vendors, the fire chiefs, the fire marshals, and the licensee or the license holder. If we do this, that'll help to solve a lot of these problems. BDAs need to be checked out regularly, annually, and at least a basic check annually, and maybe every 5 years. The entire system needs to be gone through. Levels need to be checked. All this is so important because you literally can destroy a radio system to where first responders can't talk at all. And there's been many situations. I recently dealt with a situation at Sacramento State University. They installed a new BDA. A vendor from Colorado came out, installed a new BDA there. There were 2 other BDAs that were currently working on the site. He installed another one within a quarter mile of that. He turned it on, and I got a call from the Police Officers Association at Sac State, and they said, hey, our radios aren't working out here on our conventional channel. Now, I'm not the license holder for the conventional channel that they have, the basic repeater on top of the university, but they suddenly couldn't talk. And then I also noticed on our system that we had 2 or 3 channels literally disabling themselves. And when a channel disables itself, it means that it's heard interference. And if it's the 4 control channels, then everybody in the region has to suffer. But in this case, it was just 4 of the voice or 3 of the voice channels that had disabled themselves. And it was slowly wandering across the frequency spectrum. And I thought, we got a real problem here, guys. We've got probably a BDA situation. It literally took us 3 to 4 days of tracking this down, 4 guys in the field with Anritsu signal level analyzers before we could finally find this on the campus. Had I known that this BDA was going to be installed on that campus and the way it was going to be installed, I could have solved that problem. We would have never had the issue in the beginning. So it's really a critical thing to open up that communication to the licensee, the FCC license holder, to let them know that a BDA is getting installed in a certain area. We need to review those plans, and we need to work with that vendor directly. And, I want to make the vendor's job as easy as possible, because our end goal is to provide communications in building for our first responders. But if what happens is you've destroyed the radio system for all responders, throughout the area, then you've really caused a problem.
You keep saying the word vendor. Who's the vendor?
Well, vendor is a contractor, somebody that, a vendor and a contractor.
So that's us, or our GCs, or electrical contractors, the people that are
GCs, electrical contractors. Yeah. So that's what I mean by vendor. Somebody that's selling and installing a BDA, in our case, to the building owner.
So let's say this Sac State deal. So where was the fire department or, code even? Do they even have to look at that stuff when they're installing this PDA? Or where were they involved? At what point were they involved, or should they have been involved?
So normally the fire marshal comes out and commissions the BDA after the installation has been complete, all the optimization work had been done. But in this case, the building was a relatively new building. They had an RFP that they had bid on the street, stating they needed communications in the building. And the vendor or the contractor in this case, turned on the BDA without going through the proper channels, and they left it on overnight. And they left it on for several days after that. So while the building was still in the construction phase. So it hadn't properly been commissioned, and hadn't been properly checked out before it went on air.
Nate, I have a quick question for you. We discussed like a large shopping center or Sacramento State. Do you look at that as a licensee? Would you look at that as an per building problem, or would you look at that as a backbone issue that you have to deal with in one complete project rather than multiple small projects?
So ideally, when a building department issues a plan to build out a building, I should be informed that building is going to happen in an area. Some kind of construction is going to take place in the area. If I'm informed of that, then I know what to do. Is I could go to Google Earth, or I could look at any other media and say, we have a lot of surrounding buildings in this area. It looks like a shopping center might be going in here. Maybe as a licensee, I need to plan to put in another radio site. So if I put in a small, what they call ARRS site, an Astro repeater site with 4 or 5 channels in it in that localized area, then you probably wouldn't need a BDA, or you need a lot fewer BDAs. You could also feed BDAs off of my site that is in that local area. So what's so important is that as Sacramento, in our case, we have 1,000 square miles of area that we cover with our radio system. And in those areas, we're seeing large expansions of buildings going in place. So a lot of counties and cities are facing this, is that as they expand and grow, which is great for the economy and people's lives here, they put in larger and larger buildings, buildings made of materials with low E glass. Low E glass is not good for penetration of RF. Any of that, metal, concrete, all these structures really degrade the RF signal as it enters into the building. And so if I know ahead of time, for example, if I knew that Sacramento State already had 2 BDAs on it, I would have approached the vendors or the contractors and said, hey, why don't we tap a signal and leverage fiber in this case, and then bring the fiber over to the building, because many universities have extensive fiber already run between buildings, or counties do the same thing. Let's tap into that fiber and then provide a DAS system inside the building that would not go back out of the building and affect, several other agencies. So, if I have pre-planning or knowledge ahead of time of what's going to go in place, then I can actually directly assist with planning, for in-building coverage. And that's a wonderful thing if that happens. But again, in my county at the moment, that doesn't happen.
I'm confused why you didn't suggest that solution in this case. I'm sure you were notified, right? I'm sure you knew this project was going on.
No, I never knew the project was going in. Yeah.
Whose responsibility was to tell you?
Yeah.
So whose responsibility was supposed?
Well, let's actually back it up a little bit and say, all right, a building is going to be built, an RFP is going to come out. One of the problems that we've seen over and over again, is we get the RP and it says ERRCS system must be installed. So that's what gets bid on. That's what everybody, okay, we'll slap it in ERRCS. At what point in that process, like Jesse was saying, when should you be brought in? When should the license holder, when should they be involved in the conversation?
The license holder actually should be involved in the conversation from the day that the construction plans are moving forward to permitting. As soon as I know that a building is going to be constructed in an area, in a certain area, I need to be notified of that. And if there's a plan to install a BDA or a public safety enhancement radio system of some kind in there, I need to be notified ahead of time, because in many cases, as we've seen, is that just for convenience, the contractor will say, oh, we need to put a BDA in this building, not even knowing if it's really required. So they don't do the signal level checks ahead of time.
Where's the disconnect between what I'm guessing is the fire marshal or the AHJ, which, what is that? Authority having jurisdiction, is supposed to be notifying you at that point, right?
Well, no, the authority, the AHJ, I really can't hold them responsible for this, because, the NFPA has code, it's a policy and a code that says any building that needs public safety enhancement will have it. So, what they're doing is they're following the code, the NFPA code. So what needs to happen is at a county level, when architectural services becomes involved or issues a permit for construction, they need to notify me, the license holder, that this is going to take place. And then I need to be brought in the loop on the successful bidding vendor. Whoever the contractor is that won that contract, I need to be directly involved with them to determine if a BDA needs to be installed in that area or that potential building. And that's where the disconnect is that
I'd like to push back on that a little bit, just because of the way that we see projects roll out. And this is something that we're railing against constantly. And that's everybody, the RFP comes out, it says, what it says about fire code, and then a contractor gets awarded. We think that the conversation has to happen ahead of time, because, especially for building owners and for developers and everything, they have a budget. And we're going to build to this budget. They need to know early on, is this system going to be required? Is it likely to be expected, et cetera? And what's that cost likely to be? So the earlier you engage, in my opinion, the better off you are. If you wait until that thing's going to permitting, well, now you've got a building that's designed that maybe doesn't have the infrastructure for that ERRCS, or maybe they've designed to it and they've awarded it and everything else to install it when it's not needed. Hey, we've got I won't name any names here, but we've got a project, Nathan, that we brought to your attention to say, hey, and you put the brakes on that thing, and maybe we can at a high level hit on what happened there and a potential solution for what was being spec'd in. And maybe you might feel a little more comfortable describing that. I might release some details that you might not like released. But I think the project that I'm talking about, and BDA was about to be slapped in 800 feet from the existing 300 feet from the macro tower. So what kind of problems is that going to cause, right?
Yeah, I mean, that could cause the system to go down. That literally, it could cause serious issues on our system if it's not installed correctly. And yeah, that was a local building that was, it actually is in the phases of being constructed. And you did bring that to my attention, which I very much appreciate, because that was a bid that was out on the street to install a BDA there. And, now that I'm aware of that project, I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen in a conventional sense. So that, moving forward, I'm going to make sure that all plans are reviewed on that, and that a creative solution came up, because in this case, it's a county facility that's going up. And you would think that as a county employee, I'm informed of all the buildings that go up, but that's not the case. Just because I'm a county employee doesn't mean, I'm not in architectural services. I deal with radio communications. So, when a building is going to go in and they think it may need a BDA, they need to get me involved first. And if they did that, that would solve an enormous amount of problems that we have. But yeah, this building that you're speaking about locally is still going in. And I'm going to make sure that a BDA is not put in that building unless it's done very, very stringent, under strict standards.
Nate, between you and me, as the county, would you put a BDA in that building to solve that problem? Even if that building has problems, what is your good solution going to be
Well, the solution would be not to put a donor antenna on top of the facility. It would have to be fiber fed.
Okay, so that's my whole contention with what we've done is we've created a fire code that, you know, and we're trying to back that out, but there's this mentality that the BDA is the solution, and that's what's concerning me long term. And you know.
Well,
Let's talk to
and
the
what
chief
I
about-
hear you saying is this is all Chief Perdue's fault.
Yeah.
So let's let him have
Yeah.
a.
Chief, what kind of code are you creating over there, buddy?
I'm not saying that at all, because I know the chief, he's caught in the middle.
Let me tag in here and feel like I'm at an MMA fight here. And yeah, you know, what's interesting is it's a terminology issue. You know, the phrase BDA has become synonymous with a solution. And it's one of many solutions that can be utilized to solve the in-building problem. The code doesn't require a BDA. The code requires a solution to enhance a communication signal. But the industry and many in public safety and in the radio world and everywhere else have narrowed down to this term called BDA because it's probably used more than some of the other solutions. But it's kind of like sheetrock. Sheetrock is a brand of drywall, and Kleenex is a brand of tissue, but everybody says Kleenex or they say sheetrock. The same things happened in the in-building world, that solutions have been called BDAs, and that's one type of solution. So I want to make that, you know, clear that that's not what the code requires. It requires a solution inside the building. And Nathan's exactly right. You know, one of the things that people often don't understand is there are the fire codes and standards, and then there's the FCC rules and regulations. There's nothing anywhere written that says because you comply with one set of rules, you don't have to comply with the other set of rules, or vice versa. You still have a responsibility. And this goes back to the person that's installing the system, that's turning the system on, has a responsibility, number one, to meet fire code compliance, but number two, they have an equal responsibility to meet all the rules of the FCC, because they are enhancing that system. And the FCC Part 90.219 says that you must have written authorization prior to activating or retransmitting on somebody else's frequencies. So Nathan has a legal requirement that his frequencies have to have written authorization before you can use that. And all these situations that have been discussed here today wouldn't have happened had that happened. Now, in the fire code, it talks about FCC Part 90.219, but one of the things we've done in the next edition of the code that we've proposed is that written authorization be required upon installation and activation of the system.
How about design?
It's there as well. When you submit plans and specifications for a system, you have to involve the frequency license holder up front. You have to have approval. And one of the things that the AHJ is required to do is provide technical specifications for that installation in their jurisdiction. What frequencies do we have? What type of system do we have? And all the other parameters. Well, many fire marshals don't have that information. Who does? The person that runs the radio system. So it requires a partnership between those two individuals. And I often say, you know, the whole purpose here is to enhance communications. And one of the biggest miscommunications we have is between the stakeholders. And the stakeholders are the frequency license holder, the fire marshal, the building owner, and the contractor. All those folks have to get together early on in this process to say, number one, are we going to need a solution? And number two, what's the best solution for this particular building in this particular location? Because one size fits all will not work. And that's a problem we have with the competency of the workforce that are now putting a lot of these systems in, is they don't understand the nuances associated with the solutions and making sure they're not creating a problem. I wrote an article a couple of months ago that was titled "First, Do No Harm." And when our paramedics and others in the medical community, they have a Hippocratic oath, and it talks about first do no harm. At the coalition, we've been pushing this same narrative out about when you go to put a solution in, you must first do no harm, such as take a system down like Nathan's talking about.
Right on. Let's grab another beer.
I guess, Chief, and I agree with what you're saying 100%, but unfortunately, 90% of the time, that's not the way it's enforced. And
Hey, Greg, I want to dive into this here in just a minute, but I think it's time for us to get our next beer, and then let's dive into the meat of this. What do you think about
oh,
that?
sure, why not?
Hey guys, before we go any further, these guys look thirsty to me. I see those empty beers. Hey, Jonathan, can we get that second beer going?
Definitely. I hope you guys are ready for this one. This is our Imperial Sour Base that we infused with raspberry and spree candies. So if you remember spree candies as a kid, that's what it's made with.
Very awesome.
Very
Cheers.
nice. And what prompted you to make this one?
Well, we just like to make fun beers. We love spree candies. We love raspberry. We decided to make it and just put it all together.
Excellent. Good
It
stuff.
really tastes like spree candy. That is awesome.
really?
Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah.
For those of you following along at home, here's what it's looking like. Sip and Spree. This is the one you should be cracking open and enjoying right now. So let's get back to the Chief and Nathan. Greg, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I could tell by your voice you were getting a little thirsty. I want to make sure you wet your whistle real quick. So
there you go.
keep going. Let us know your thoughts. What are you asking?
No, my question, and this goes out both to the Chief and Nathan, is that I'm going back to the way it's enforced. And because of the wording of the documents, we have a building owner, and we've put the onus on the building owner, and the building owner has no legal way to put in a BDA. And in the rules, it specifically said if a third party seeks to use a signal booster, that their only remedy is to seek the licensee. And again, we had an issue.
So you said the FCC. So Nathan, you wrote that letter? Was that you?
No. This is the FCC. This is 9219.
Oh,
The rule.
well, what's the difference? What's the difference between the FCC, Nathan?
Well,
What's
the
difference there?
FCC says that I have to seek the licensee, right? They're the only ones that can do this. So all of the other minutia that's holding up this building, we're holding up building owners from getting TCOs for something they can't do.
I'm still confused. So the FCC is
Federal Communications Commission.
Nathan. What are you?
I'm the licensee, or I hold the federal license for the frequencies that are being used.
Okay, so the FCC authorizes the use of these.
The FCC requires if a third party seeks to use a signal booster, they must obtain the written authorization of the frequency holder or the licensee. So now I'm the building owner, and I go to Nate and I go, hey, Nate, I want to put one of these in Home Depot downtown. Nate goes and he looks at his master plan and he says, no, I'm not going to allow you to do that because we're going to put in an ASR out there. But that's not going to happen for 6 months, or that's not going to happen for a year. What ends up happening is the building owner then, because they get between a rock and a hard place, you've got a licensee that's exercising their responsibility to their system and to the FCC. And like Nate and many others have said, nobody's been able to solve the in-building problem across the board. Carriers can't do it. Carriers won't even use signal boosters at all anymore. But yet we don't have an avenue in the fire code that says if your licensee rejects, that
What's the solution?
well, not even what's the solution. We can't hold up your CTO. And
So
what's-
they're not going to let you occupy the building. So basically, they have nothing.
The building owner is responsible to the licensee, not to the fire code. When the chief says that it's the responsibility of the integrator, I disagree. It's the responsibility of the party that took the responsibility, which is the county fire official or the code official, to follow the laws. I mean, all of this gets pushed back on you and I and the builder of the system. We can't. We don't have jurisdiction here. The only person that has jurisdiction is the building owner or the party that is seeking the use of the BDA, which in my mind, if a building's going in, that is the fire marshal. That is the building code official who's seeking the authority.
Chief, have you heard about situations like
Let's
this?
talk about this.
I don't totally agree with where Greg's going. The responsibility to comply with the code is the person that decides they want to build a building. So when an individual comes into a jurisdiction and says, I want to build a building, they have an obligation to meet the building code, the fire code, the mechanical code, the plumbing code, and electrical code, any other codes and standards that are in effect at that time. This same situation happens, and when you look at the license holder like Nathan, they're almost like the fourth utility. You can't get the gas company to turn the gas on until you comply with all the requirements related to gas. You can't get the water authority to turn the water on, or the power company to turn the power on, until you comply with all the requirements. So the building owner has a responsibility to meet all the requirements. Now, what the fire marshal can't do and what the building owner can't do is authorize turning the solution on, a signal booster on. The only person that can do that is the frequency license holder. And that's where this communications piece is so critical, that they communicate beforehand. If Nathan and I were in the same jurisdiction, we would need to be communicating about how are we going to handle the installation of signal boosters in our community. What needs to happen? Are there areas where we can't put them because of some other reason? And if that's the case, what most code authorities have is a section called alternate methods and materials. So they have the ability to look and say, is there another way to solve this code requirement so that we can achieve compliance and provide safety for the first responders?
So I have been told by folks in certain jurisdictions that unless you get a call from me specifically, we're not putting in a BDA. So if you see it in fire code, you see it in anywhere, that unless it comes from me directly, we're not allowing it. We're not authorizing it. So don't even ask.
That comes from the licensee, right?
That comes from a licensee.
Because that's a licensee saying that.
That's the licensee. So now, as a building owner, or as the person, because you're saying it's the integrator.
I think the way you're going with that question, though, I think you just answered, right? Which was, licensee says you can't do that. Fire code says we have to have our communications inside this building. What was the term that you used there, Chief? Is that the answer, that we asked the fire department or the fire officials to go to their A, M, and T? I'm already losing it, all these acronyms.
Well, it's all alternate methods and materials. But here's the thing that I think is being missed. The first responders have an issue that they can't communicate inside a building. So if I got a license holder that says I'm not going to allow anything, then I've got police chief, fire chief, and EMS is saying, well, we've got first responders in danger because they can't communicate inside a building. That's going to get elevated up to a policy level within that jurisdiction, where somebody's going to make a call either above the frequency license holder's head, because it's not the individual. Nathan is a responsible party, correct me if I'm wrong, Nathan, for his jurisdiction, but the jurisdiction actually holds the license. It's issued to the county and an individual. I was a frequency license holder in my county at one time. I was responsible for that. But the county held the license. I was just the one responsible to make sure the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed. But policymakers are going to make a decision if they're not communicating, if they're not working together to solve the problem. Because if the macro radio system doesn't provide sufficient penetration for first responders to communicate inside buildings, something's got to be done. It's not to say that it's a BDA. It's not to say it's a DAS or a voting receiver. What's the best way to solve that problem for that jurisdiction? That communication, like I said earlier, has to happen up front and work that out. And that's the exception to the rule. And looking across the United States in the areas I travel, most people are working this out. They're getting together, they're talking about what the issues are and figuring out how do we best handle this for the type of radio system we have, the environment we have, the geographic area we have, and be able to solve that problem. There's going to be a few isolated cases where there's headbutting going on.
I'm talking about whose lap it ends up in. Because basically what you're saying, what the code does, is it puts the building owner in a no-win situation. When they have a licensee that says, listen, we're responsible for our systems. We will build our infrastructure to support. This is about an infrastructure issue. This needs to be, okay, if we're going to charge a building owner, it needs to be to fund the licensee to put in the proper facilities to support communications.
I think you're hitting on a much bigger problem that we talked about plenty of times that's getting debated at very high levels, and you're out there pushing that message all over the place. You sit on multiple boards. You're making sure that people are talking about these real high-level big issues. But I think the point of today is to kind of talk about these two parties. It's a complicated ecosystem is what I think we're figuring out with all this debate right now. There's multiple stakeholders that all have their own goals, objectives, and actually one thing that I think it gets lost in the mix here a lot of times is the licensee and the fire code officials are actually after the same mission, right?
Yep.
So a lot of
Yep.
times it seems as if they're butting heads, and that's what. But as we've discussed with Nathan before, Nathan's job is essentially to provide for communications for the first responders. The first responders want those communications. They're marching towards the same mission. They want the same thing. The problem is obviously that communication breaks down. And then and then you don't have communications inside the building, right? So where do you guys think? Let me ask you this, Chief and Nathan. It all seems so kumbaya right now. It all seems so easy. You guys are both saying the same thing. Hey, we're working towards the same mission. Why do communications break down? Why does there become this disconnect? And maybe, Nathan, you're not experiencing it too bad where you're at, but when it does happen, why is there a disconnect between the fire code officials and the licensee in some jurisdictions? And if you're not experiencing it, I can tell you, we are.
So we're talking about fourth utility, right? The thing that I always see with all of my partners and my customers and the contractors or vendors, what you say, right? Obviously, this is not being thought of as that fourth utility, right? It needs to be thought of as that. Because right now it's sort of this huge construction plan. Guess what? They're worried about the three. They're not worried about this one. So what happens is it gets lost until it gets to the point where, oh, you need that. And now we're at a state in the project where it's kind of past the point of communications, and now it's pointing fingers. Am I right or wrong on that?
Well, I think, the key thing here is this is new in the code. And a lot of the growing pains we've had from 09 to today are people learning about what is an enhancement system, how does it work, what's involved, what are all the rules, and the rules are going to change, as they go forward. So we've learned a lot since 2009 when this first went into the code. So things are improving, and we can't keep going back to, well, this didn't work 3 years ago, or we had a problem 4 years ago or 5 years ago. People are still learning. I talked to a state last week that just updated their code to the 2012 edition. Now we're working right now on the 2024 edition of the International Fire Code, and they just adopted the 2012 edition. So for all those code enforcement folks in that state, in that area, this is brand new. It's the first time that they've had a requirement for in-building emergency responder communication systems. So it's going to take some time for them to learn, number one, how do we do this? What are we doing? How do we do it? And how do we do it right? And it's going to take time for those frequency license holders to understand, hey, we've got this new thing coming in. What is a DAS? What is a BDA? What is what some other type of solution? So it's going to take some time for all this to flesh out. And we went through this in the code world when fire alarm systems went into the code, when fire sprinkler systems went into the code. We had all these same issues that you're seeing right now about who can do what, when do they do it, who's doing it right, who's doing it wrong. But we've worked through that by communicating, by working together, by getting all the stakeholders together and having discussions about how to best solve this problem. Where now we have certification, we have meetings where people get together and talk about all the issues. And that's the key piece is education. It's making sure that, number one, the frequency license holder, like Nathan, understands exactly what the issues are, that the fire official understands exactly what the problem is they're trying to solve, and understand what each one's roles and responsibilities are, so that at the end of the day, the building owner, which Greg mentioned earlier, if the building owner gets caught in the middle, somebody in the mayor's office or the county manager's office is going to hear about it, because there's nothing more important to a community than economic development. It's the most talked about issue. I've been in government for 40 years. It's the most talked about issue, and I serve as an elected official now. nobody's going to stop growth in the community. So it's going to force people to get together and talk about how to solve these problems. There'll be some isolated circumstances, but they're going to come together and they're going to solve these problems so that we can protect our first responders.
That's the main point, right?
And that's the main point. I would like to leave with one other thought here.
You're leaving?
No, I'd like to leave this conversation with one
He's
other
out.
thought. And that is what the chief just said is 100% correct. We went through this with fire sprinklers, right? We went through this with fire alarm systems. However, there's a big difference with what we're doing here. And that is that when we talk about fire sprinklers and we talk about fire alarms, we're talking about affecting that building. We're talking about affecting one building. When we talk about this, we're talking about, in Sacramento County's position, we're talking about a building that needs a system that can affect 18,000 other public safety users and take them offline. And that gravity is not there. We talk about this as being a building problem. We don't talk about it as, if we screw this up, we take the power utility out for the whole city. We put a bunch of people in the dark. That's not what's happening. Unfortunately,
No, it's a
that's
different
what's
monster
happening.
altogether.
It is.
Right.
Yeah.
It keeps rolling back to this. I even have this discussion this morning. Oh, it's simple. Put an access point in a building. It's not that.
Hey guys, listen, this is a big subject here. There's a lot we could unpack. We could spend days on
Yeah,
this
we
thing,
could do
right?
a
I
few
think
episodes.
Greg does spend days and days on this. He commits a lot of time to this subject and to trying to really advance this issue and help bring the ecosystem together. But we do have to end this party at some point. I think we're probably going to get kicked out of here. It's not the first place I've been kicked out of. But let's go for final statements real quick. Chief, you got anything you want to leave us with today?
Yeah, I think the key thing is, like I've said before, this is not one size fits all. Every geographic area, demographic area across this country has different needs. Installing signal boosters in one jurisdiction is a great solution because they don't have the funding to enhance infrastructure. In other areas, they may add some infrastructure. But at the end of the day, there are going to be buildings that need communications coverage for first responders. Regardless of how good the macro system is, there's going to be buildings that need help so that first responders can communicate and protect their lives. So we have to realize that one size doesn't fit all. And the second most important piece is it has to be done right and done right the first time. This is about proper design, proper installation, proper testing, and making sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed and all the rules are followed. And we won't have some of these issues we've been talking about. That's what needs to take place at the end of the day. And the Safer Buildings Coalition is working to spread that message and spread that information that it's about communication up front. Before you start building a building, before you start drawing the plans, is getting all the stakeholders together and share that information about what your expectations are and what your goals are. Thank you guys for allowing us to participate and share some insights about this very important subject.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank
we
you,
appreciate your generosity of time. I know we've asked a lot, and thank you. I know you're a busy
Yeah, I
man.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Nathan, do you have any final thoughts for us?
Yeah, I sure do. And I think the main thing is that, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on this subject. And, I appreciate the participation of Chief Perdue. Communication is really the key here. And that's in no pun intended, but, it's important that the frequency license holders or the licensees work directly with the fire marshals and the fire officials to educate them and make sure that they understand that the licensee needs to be involved in every step of the way. And this has to go all the way up to architectural services in your counties or your cities. Any of the permitting processes, you need to communicate with your contractors. You need to be ready to interface with the contractors that contact you and say, hey, can you tell me about your system and what kind of system do you have? What frequencies do you use? You need to be open to that because again, what really helps us as a community is the growth of our cities, and it's financially driven, but it benefits us all. And we need to make it easier for our building owners to build that building. We don't want to put up a lot of roadblocks or issues that would make it more difficult for them to enhance the community in a much better way. And by through the communication with the license holder and the fire marshals and any of those officials, we can easily solve this problem in the sense of at least making sure that the licensee understands what's going in, where, and when. And if that's done, I really, the possibilities are endless here. There's so many different ways that we can enhance communications in buildings through use of fiber communications, Wi-Fi, you name it. There's so many great solutions that can be done that don't involve a traditional BDA. And anyway, like I say, I just want to thank you all for allowing me the opportunity to speak on behalf of Sacramento County. And we sure look forward to solving this problem on our end.
Thanks, guys. I really
you.
appreciate it.
We do. We appreciate this a great deal. And he hit on a subject there at the end, which is about converging networks and everything else. And that's going to be a future Tap Talk. So thanks for leading into that.
Hey,
Nathan,
call me if you need anything, too. I can connect you with these guys.
So thanks to our guests for joining us. Thanks to Jesse Friedman, Greg Glenn, the DAS Doctor. Thanks to Tilted Mash for pouring us the delicious brew. I wish I could have drinking them. I sound like I'm drunk right now. I'm drunk with all the knowledge I just took in. Okay. But thank you to everybody. Thanks to the viewer. If you have any questions you want to have us answer or any topics you want us to cover in future episodes of Tap Talks, reach out to us at taptalks@powerofpulse.com. taptalks@powerpulse.com. We'll do our best to get them answered or addressed in future episodes. We want to engage with you. We're trying to bring real value to you, the audience. So let us know what you want to hear, and we'll do our best to serve you. Thank you. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. We appreciate your participation. We're back here. We've got Nathaniel Hinkle and Alan Perdue with us. Thanks for your effort on the filming of Tap Talks, and thanks for joining us today to help us answer any questions that people might have. Looks like Nathan's somewhere tropical and Alan's out somewhere behind him fishing. Hope you guys are having a nice vacation together.
Yep. I wish.
Greg, there was a lot of conversation going on in the chat box. Is there anything you want to address right off the bat as we get started?
I mean, I've seen a lot. Pablo brings up that all I'm going to throw out, and I think it needs to be discussed. This is an infrastructure problem, really. I mean, we need to give this to somebody like Nate, for instance, and they need to do with their network what they need to do. And I keep seeing this. We got it's a partnership that has to occur with the licensee and the contractors to develop solutions. And people have said, well, Greg, you don't think the fire code, you're against firemen having coverage. I'm not. What I am for is the fire code saying the right thing, which is we need to fix the problem. And the only thing that we can do to fix the problem is seek the Part 90 license holder and fund them to fix the problem. So it might be a BDA and say this building here where we're sitting, but it probably is not. It's probably going to be something like where I'm sitting here, maybe an ASR or a base station outside.
What's an ASR?
Well, an astral site repeater or astral repeater site in a mobile situation. But that decision cannot be made in the fire code. That decision has to be made by the licensee. And that's my whole point. And we are at a position in some markets, and a lot of them. I mean, I can tell you that, Seattle, even Sacramento to some extent, in my mind, we're in a position where every incremental BDA now is going to cause some harm to the network. It's either going to raise the noise floor or it's going to negatively affect the BDA that is next to it. Okay, and by next to it, that all depends on how the other ones were installed, because there was no engineering that went into this. It was oh, you got a building with a problem, you put in a BDA, Kenny. Your next door neighbor, you put in a BDA. Well, rather than taking it to the licensee and the licensee looking at it and saying, well, I know that that I got to cover this piece of property, and maybe it is putting in a BDA and feeding fiber. None of that was never engineered. And so when people, because I've been getting a lot of flack because I maybe disagree with the fire code. It's not that I disagree with what the fire code is saying. In essence, we have to fix the problem. I'm saying you cannot, the physics is not going to allow you to do what the fire code says to do. It's not, it will crash your radio system. there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it if you follow the fire code. And I know, Chief Perdue is I want to bring in the chief and Nate on this. And I know that some people have said, well, it's the difference between Kleenex
Let
and
me go to this.
tissue.
So Kim Bernard on the chat's pointing out that, hey, listen, fiber is an expensive solution. It's going to take more than one stakeholder being a part of that to be part of the solution. Nathan or Alan, do you guys have any ideas? Both of you have a background working in governments. Are there any ideas on the table in terms of how do we start to fund more holistic solutions rather than what we're doing right now, which is kind of putting a Band-Aid on the problem? How do we come up with a holistic solution? Well, those holistic solutions are really available, but how do we fund that then? Any ideas from you guys?
Well, I think, at a governmental level, there needs to be funding provided for those license holders or the people that hold the license and are responsible for it, to make sure that either improvements to the radio system could be made directly, as Greg was mentioning. There's smaller ASR sites which have fewer channels. That's a Motorola term, but it can apply to Harris radio systems or any other radio system you have out there. There are smaller sites with not quite as many capability of channels that will still serve the needs of certain entities, firefighters and police. So it won't carry the same capacity, but as a smaller site, it's easier to put in, it's less costly. And so these smaller sites can go in place if we have the funding. And some government agencies are funded that way. Our agency is not funded that way. It's funded directly from the public safety first responders that are on our radio system. And our budget is very tight. We don't have that money right now. So at a governmental level, there needs to be funds allocated, passed down either from the building owner as an additional cost, such as utility costs. When you install utilities in a building, there's certain costs and regulations that have to be met. But in order for us to really give our first responders the best radio system coverage in building, we're going to have some funding there. And I don't see that happening unless it's mandated on a government level. I really don't see it happening. There are some creative solutions. Fiber costs $1 million a mile to put in. That's the average cost. And even though Sacramento has a fair amount of fiber laid throughout the city and in a lot of areas, there's still not a lot of fiber going into all of the buildings that connect. So it's a very expensive option. Somebody has to pay for that. And, unless there's some kind of a governmental funding, either through the taxpayers, God, I hate to say raise the taxes, or through the building owners, people putting back, buildings in, there's got to be some incremental fees, as well as, for example, let's say a $500 fee for our agency to go through and evaluate the documentation provided by the building owners or the people that are constructing the building and the as-builts, so that we can actually spend the time to go through. My staffing is really geared to support the radio system, and really isn't geared to support the additional BDA requirements that we're seeing now. This is this is something that came on in the last year or so, as far as our department being aware of it or made aware of it. And we're not sure exactly how we're going to get that funding. I'm not sure. Maybe you have some ideas there, Chief. Go ahead and take it.
All right, thank you, Nathan. And I want to clear up again, one misconception is the code doesn't require a BDA. The code requires a solution. And I think that's the key point that we have to focus on going forward, is there are multiple solutions to solve this problem. Greg's exactly right. In some areas, it's an infrastructure problem. And the community has to look and say, if we're weak in some areas, how do we fix that? And I've seen that happen in some areas where they would install a new tower site, and the developer would help cover some of that cost to keep from having to put individual solutions into multiple buildings that he or she may be planning in that community. And then that helps the entire buildings built, that regardless of how strong your infrastructure is, signal is not going to enter that building. LEED certified buildings and other types of solutions. So, we have to look at this as in totality, that involving the frequency license holder, involving the fire marshal, involving the entire community, to say, how do we solve this problem in our community based on our needs and our fiber, our budgets, and other things that are coming here? So when someone builds a building, we run into this issue oftentimes with water. A developer decides, I'm going to build a building in a community. There's not sufficient water pressure from the city water system to meet the demand of the sprinkler system. So what happens? The developer has to put in an alternate water supply and a fire pump to help meet that design criteria so that they can be in compliance with the code. Very similar concept here. I'm not saying RF and water are exactly the same, but the issue of there's not sufficient supply to meet the demand inside the building is the same. So something has to be done, and communities look various ways at providing that water. They have tap fees, they have usage fees, and various types of things to help cover that. So it's important for a community that adopts requirements to help protect their first responders, which is first and foremost priority. The process for doing that, and putting a signal booster in every single building is not the answer. But there are many buildings where it may be the answer, and there's other types of solutions that can go there. So it gets back to communications. In building communications for public safety is a communications issue, but the communication starts before you get there. It's about all the stakeholders getting together and figuring out what's best for our environment.
I want to hit on real quick. I mean, just, a lot of the questions and stuff are about, just the troubles of not having somebody like you, Nate, right? That we can call, we can reach out to, we can, gain a relationship with. It seems like that's a lot what I'm reading here is, it's not that easy. We don't have him, you know what I mean? So what would you say from your community, Nathan, how we should attack that problem nationwide?
Nationwide, I think there needs to be an outreach to the license holders, and they need to be made aware that really this is their problem, their responsibility. Since they hold the license, they need to make sure that the infrastructure needs to be upgraded in order to give this coverage to the in-building community. So as first responders run in the building, they have to have coverage. If I'm not aware that there is a need for coverage in a building, there's not much I can do if nobody makes me aware of this. If a BDA is installed, as we commonly see in our area now, without my knowledge, I don't even know it affects our radio system until it's too late. They've already turned it on, and suddenly we have a problem. So
right, but I guess the question more is like, people are trying to reach out, is what I'm reading, and they're not able to get that.
Maybe
contact,
rephrase
right?
it. Why do you think some radio shops or license holders are resistant to engage?
are resistant to what now?
Why are some resistant to engage? We've had some comments in the chat box, and we've experienced it ourselves where we reach out, we try to make that connection, we try to get out in front of the problem. They don't want to engage. It's tough to get a call back. They kind of want to put their heads in the sand a little bit. What would be the reason for that?
Well, I think they're avoiding the real problem. I think they don't really realize the severity of the situation when it comes to installing something that can affect the macro system, the larger system. So if you don't put that information out there for the contractor that comes in and bids on this, if you don't say, hey, I'm a primary contact, along with the fire marshals and the fire officials, along with the permitting department, you need to contact me. You're making a huge mistake as a license holder. And it is so important for the license holder to publish either on a website or make available through the fire marshals easy information to understand for the contractors putting this in. Now, Sacramento County is currently working on that. And, we don't have that out currently. So right now we pretty much send an email out to people that contact us, and that's not as good as it needs to be. But again, we're working on correcting that. We'll either have that on a web page that's easily accessible to contractors, which I think is the best solution, or we'll provide that through the permitting department. But, without that information, it's very difficult for the contractors to come in and know what the licensee is expecting when you're installing a BDA. How do you design that? What kind of signal levels? And that's very difficult for outside contractors to come in and do that. Now, why other counties aren't really jumping on board this ship, they're making a huge mistake. They really are, and they just don't realize it yet. They'll realize it soon.
Okay.
Well, my question is, okay, and this goes out to, okay, your county, and this is where I have an issue with maybe the fire code, because the fire code gets adopted by a lot of these counties, cities.
Right.
They don't know what they've adopted. And I know you say we all say it's an education problem. I don't think anybody at the table doesn't agree it's an education problem. You've got, I mean, you're going to have to stand up, Nate. And I mean, well, I don't know, but I mean, I know how much the quality of personnel that you're going to have to pay to do this. Immediately, once you've let one BDA on your system and you're doing that, it's probably $150,000 to $200,000 a year burden cost to your organization to stand up, the organization to do this. Yet there's nothing in the fire code that talks about funding that. There's nothing, the thing the fire code tells the building owner to go put in a BDA. And so and this is maybe for the chief, because, the more I think about this, I go through this every night. We have to solve it at a higher level. We have to come in and in the fire code, in my opinion, is what's caused the issue, because the fire code didn't really deal with the reality of what they were doing. Yes, everybody agrees.
But can I ask, like, so I know Chief already mentioned it once, and you said they say the fire code says you have to put in a BDA, but the fire code doesn't say that you have to put in a BDA, right? It says you have to.
Modified fire code doesn't. If you go back to the code that's in
That's been adopted.
Okay,
gotcha. All right. So yeah, go ahead, Chief.
Yeah.
Yeah, the code talks about if you use a BDA, but it doesn't, and I'll say this again, and I'll disagree with Greg forever on this. It doesn't say you have to use a BDA. It says you have to solve a communication problem inside the building. Now, what's important to understand here is there are many things in building codes and fire codes that require a building owner to spend money. And all of them that are life safety systems, in my 40 years in public safety, have I ever had a building owner say, I'm really glad I have the opportunity to spend money on a life safety system? Never have I had that. So it's, you have to look at the cost piece, but you also have to look at what is the intent of a code provision when it's dealing with life safety of the occupants and their first responders that are responding to the building. There are many, many things in the fire code and building code that are there to protect first responders. It's not just this radio enhancement system. There's many other things that come into play. So that's going to happen. That's not going away. So what we have in a community is a community that has to stand up and say, we have issues with our first responders communicating. I can tell you in my jurisdiction, when I was a fire chief and emergency services director, we had buildings that we knew you could not have communications in. We had what I would call an excellent 28-channel macro radio system, but we had some dead spots. And we knew about those, and we were often looking for solutions to solve those problems. We now have a solution opportunity within the fire code. But it comes back again to communication. The reason some frequency license holders don't engage is they don't understand how these systems work. The reason the fire marshals don't engage, they don't understand how these systems work. So it's something that's brand new. And I'll say this a lot when I talk that, sprinklers have been around since 1896. That was the first code that was ever developed, was the sprinkler code. So for well over 100 years, we've been learning, talking, evaluating, lessons learned, all these things about sprinklers, and do it fairly well. With ERRCS systems, we've had since 2009 when this really got introduced. So the stakeholders are learning, whether it's the integrators, whether it's the frequency license holder, whether it's the fire marshal, or anyone else is involved in this process. We're all learning together, trying to figure out how do we make it better. One of the things that's coming is at least 6 times in the next edition of the standard, the term frequency license holder has been introduced. One section says, written authorization is required before the system can be turned on. Approval, the very first step in the process, says the frequency license holder must be involved. Now, that's always been a requirement because it's a federal law. But we went one step further in the next edition of the standard and said, let's put it in here. People are missing it because it's in federal law. Let's put a link from the code to the federal standard so that people don't miss it. They understand right up front that the frequency license holder must be involved in the process. One of the other things that has been introduced and proposed for the next section is talking about noise, creating noise. The Safer Buildings Coalition issued last week a call to action to start addressing this piece about noise, making sure that people pick the right solution for the right building, that people are properly trained and understand how all this system works, because it is a complex solution solving the in-building problem. So we want to create a call to action, create a task force to look and say, what else can we do? The other piece that is important is working with other stakeholder groups. The coalition is working with, looking to work with Nate and App, may be engaged more so than probably with Safer Buildings Coalition, although we certainly welcome them and have many that have joined up, but so that we can create that dialogue and people understand and fully understand how all this meshes together, so that at the end of the day, we're talking about all the great problems we solved, not talking about problems that are being created trying to solve problems, if that makes sense.
Chief, and some people don't know this. I'm going to ask you maybe. There's a function with that, and this has been brought up to me, and I've been asked about the TI. Is it the TIA function when you want to change something in a fire code that's older? When you want to go back and what was that?
Speak up just because the mic's back.
Do you hear me, Chief?
Yeah.
Is that the TIA process? Because here's the problem the way I see it. You even made the comment. We have people that are adopting code that are as far back in 2012. And yes, the code is being modified, but the 2022 code right now. I'm going to put this out there and say that we need to change this mentality today, because by the time the new fire code gets into place, these guys are going to be spending millions of dollars dealing with interference problems. What can we do to get that done quicker? What's the best way to handle that? And is there a good avenue to do that?
Certainly, educating through training is first and foremost, letting people know there's a better way to do that. And you've been in many of the sessions I've spoke at, and we've done a lot of training together. And one of the things I always say and encourage integrators to do, and building owners and people that are designing buildings, is to ask the AHJ permission to use the most recent edition of the published standard, because things have changed from 09 to 12 to 15 to 18 to 21, and now we're working on the 2024 IFC and the 2022 NFPA 1225. So if you're an integrator, if you're a building owner or a designer, I would ask the AHJ permission to utilize the most current standard. And the reason that's important, it has new information, oftentimes from lessons learned. It allows you to use the latest technology. It oftentimes has things that will save the building owner money. And equally important, it has things that provide more safety and protection for the first responders. So that's the biggest step to go where you're talking about, Greg, is to ask, because if 09 is my adopted code and I'm on a 6-year code cycle, it's going to take a while before I get that in there. But there's nothing that prohibits under alternate design from using a more recent published standard to solve the problem.
Hey, Chief, if I could ask a question. You talked about fire sprinklers. You talked about you understand that the system is not going to handle the new load of a new building. Where does the ownership of making that call fall? And how did with sprinkler systems, how did it go from, you're learning in the codes, you're learning, and then it gets to where it is now, where everybody knows their responsibilities? And obviously we're around the 1890s, but if you can maybe call back on history, how did they walk forward from, wow, this is a mess, to now there's a well-documented system? How did they bridge that gap? How do we possibly get from the beginning to where it's a mature system and everybody understands their roles and responsibilities and embraces their roles and responsibilities?
Very much like we're doing right now, getting together, talking, communicating, solving problems that make systems better. I can tell you that I started my code enforcement in 1984. And I can tell you from 84 to today, we haven't had as many changes in the sprinkler code as we have had in building ERRCS systems since '09. Because we've had changes, but not near as many. But the code changes every 3 years. Typically it's on a 3-year code cycle. And the reason for that is there's a lot of information learned. Now, with technology like we have with an ERRCS system, it's changing even more rapid. And one of the things we've done over the last several years in code development is making codes more performance-based versus very prescriptive, saying something has to be X way. By making it performance-based, we have the latitude to utilize new information, new research, new technology to solve the problem and make it even better. But it's about communications. When we sit down and we can openly talk about what's worked and hadn't worked and get new information in the code. This last code cycle, what was proposed in NFPA 1225 was a significant change from what we've had in any previous edition. And if all of those requirements move forward through the remainder of the process between now and June, it will have a huge impact on the industry and the stakeholders. Is it perfect? No, there will never be a perfect code, because whatever we have today, we'll find out sometimes tomorrow, sometimes a year from now that, well, maybe that wasn't the best idea. It's all about communication.
So on that note, it does seem like one of the big problems is lack of communication between the license holder and the local fire official. So a new code can be adopted that says, puts a language in there about the license holder, links to that. Is that going to help drive communication with the license holder? Is that going to make them embrace it? Maybe Nathan, you can answer that question to say, hey, if a new fire code that came out and said, you have to talk to the license holder in order it gets more prescriptive in that manner. Is that going to cause the license holder to be more responsive, or are they going to continue to talk from it?
Oh, I believe so. I mean, here's the thing. I don't even get notified in many cases when a BDA goes into my county today. So in the future, the future NFPA requirements, they're actually putting the license holder as a primary point of contact. It's emphasized in that documentation. So it's going to force contractors to reach out to the license holder and ask for that certificate of retransmission, ask for permission to use those frequencies. That's going to happen. And I mean, I think it's a huge step forward. I will have to be notified when something goes in. And if I'm not notified, then hopefully I'm given the authority through the FCC to shut that off. So I really see this as a huge step forward. I mean, the lack of communication has just simply been no notification to the county of Sacramento, the frequency license holder, when these things are going in. We're just not hearing about it.
Do you guys have a way to communicate? Even communication keeps, of course, that's what we're talking about, but communication between you nationally with other radio shops or licensees, is there something set up for that?
Not that I know of. I mean, word of mouth, the Safer Buildings Coalition, one of the things that got me into this, besides in hearing Greg speak at an APCO meeting, was the fact that they had mentioned Safer Building Coalition. And I know Safer Building Coalition is pulling in a lot of different license holders such as myself to be participants, as well as equipment manufacturers and yourselves. So, you know, I really think communication is the key, and we're going to progress fairly quickly on this, especially as it's enforced or as it's written in the code. And again, I think using the latest code is the best way to handle this. We're on the cusp of a real industry changer, and that changer is that a lot of the radios that public safety are using now are going to change out in the next couple of years to software-defined radios. And by that, I mean radios today on our system can leverage not only our LMR system, our land mobile radio system for 800 megahertz, but it can leverage cellular. So we're seeing FirstNet and Verizon Wireless incorporated into Motorola and Harris radios, E.F. Johnson. We're also seeing Wi-Fi incorporated into those radios. So if there's a connection back to our core, that radio can use any three forms of communications, Wi-Fi, cellular, or RF at the 800 spectrum. It'll pick the best one and it'll start talking seamlessly. So this is really going to help to provide coverage in the field and in buildings as we move forward, because radios are being sold today with interfaces with cellular, Wi-Fi, and the LMR system. So it's a really great feature that's happening now.
I could tack on to what Nathan was saying is one of the other initiatives that we have started at the coalition is training, certification of the people that are putting these systems in, of the individuals that are designing these systems. So we're working with an organization called NICET, which is an engineering organization, to develop a certification program that technicians and designers will go through and have to go through, as AHJ say it's mandated in a particular area. And part of that training will be the piece about the frequency license holder, making sure that you have contacted them, that you understand what the requirements are, that you pick the right solution going forward. So, you know, the education piece is important. As Nathan said, we've started a new work group recently last year, Public Safety Technology Work Group, which we encourage frequency license holders to join so that we have that connection. We saw, you know, about 2 years ago that was a missing link. They were there, but we weren't actively going after and engaging them. And we've been doing that over the last year and a half, 2 years, and created a special work group so that we can have feedback and input and insight from those folks to make sure that they're working with the code development work group to solve these problems, that nobody's left out, that we're looking at, you know, from a 360-degree standpoint to solve these issues.
I want to give Greg a little bit of props. You're working on that test, right? With NICET?
Yeah, we're putting NICET together. We're trying to get, I guess the best way to put it is there's about 6 things that need to be fixed, unfortunately, and we can only do what we can do as fast as we can do them. But I think that it's happening. But we've got a lot of issues we've got to solve. And I mean, I have the perfect about this, what this is like. It's like we got the railroads out here. You know, you get Union Pacific, all these railroads. We got the track. That's the frequencies. We got the infrastructure. We got the operators. That's Union Pacific. But we decided that arbitrarily we're going to give some private guy the ability to drop a railroad engine on the train track and go up and down the track without any regulation. And we had regulation and railroads were doing fine, but now we drop these little engines in and they're knocking heads with each other. And so what we got to do is we got to get back to that regulated. We got to let the train guys do their train thing, and come up with a solution. And there are lots of solutions out there, but the solution isn't just to go drop a railroad engine wherever we think that one needs to be. We need to, it's a much bigger picture than that. And to the chief and Nate and the chief, we're talking about, and I've seen a lot of stuff here about licensees that aren't engaged. And This is going to be, in my opinion, a difficult thing because many of the licensees that aren't engaged, it's not that they're not engaged. It's that they will not use signal enhancement systems that aren't designed for their network. And so I think we've got to change the narrative, right? We've got to understand that in a VHF market, probably using a BDA is not going to be a go-to solution. I mean, you might have it, but there's going to have to be much different solutions. And I had one licensee recently that basically said, you know, the fire code comes in and it puts radios on our 800 meg network, or put BDAs on our 800 meg network, yet the fire department, when they come in and fight a fire, use VHF simplex. So the network that they're screwing with isn't even the network that they're using. So, I mean, we really got to get our arms around this and figure it out. And I think it's more than just dropping in a BDA. That's what it is. And in some cases it's going to be, no, we're not going to drop in a BDA. We're going to do another solution. And we got to get that whole infrastructure together so that we can all talk about it as a community and come up with the best solution rather than just, you know, and I just was reading one fire code. It said, I mean, out of Austin, Texas, where they're saying, was it Austin? It was one of the, anyway, where they're saying that if a building doesn't function, it will have a building enhancement system installed. Can't do that. That mentality is what's killing us. If a building doesn't have coverage, you need to go to licensee. The licensee then needs to talk about, okay, what are our options? It may be we put a base station outside. It may be that we put a BDA in there. It may be that, oh, we got another BDA next door, we're going to fiber over, or we're going to build a shopping center. We have the situation, you know, in a local shopping center recently where 2 BDAs were in place and a third one was added. The third BDA took out.
Tom Warfield also brought up that point-to-point microwave is another solution if we're looking for backhaul instead of.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, there's plenty of solutions out there, but it's not. I mean, it's an infrastructure thing.
So what I'm gathering is, one, from you, Nathan, the communication center is safer buildings, and we need to encourage everybody to join there, right? To get there so we can all communicate together, right? That's number one, I think, because that's the only thing we have right now. And so we have to have our industry, right?
Yeah, that I know of.
Okay.
That doesn't mean a lot, right? But I mean, as far as I know of, that isn't an organization that really prompted me to get involved with this.
Right on.
You know, between NAPCO and some of the discussions that your company gave at NAPCO, you know, this really prompted a call to action for me and my organization.
Well, and we do appreciate that, Nate. I want to let you know it's nice. I'm so happy that you're speaking out because we need to solve this problem. It needs to be solved, and unless people are willing to speak out and.
Well, we say tool number one is education, right? And so that's a perfect example of education worked in this point.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of comments about if only everybody was as receptive as Sacramento County. That wasn't always the case, right? Education, outreach, building relationships, that's how you get there. So I think that's an answer to one of those questions. Is it's got to take effort. It's got to take education.
It does take effort, and it's going to take money too. We got to have the funding to do it.
And can we try to answer maybe one or two of these guys?
Yeah, I agree. So we did have some questions that came in ahead of time also that I want to make sure we give a little bit of attention to. So Martin Nemezi brought up, when do you think ROIP, it's radio over internet protocol, right? Will start to penetrate the ERRCS market. So I don't know.
Well, Nate, you want to tackle that, or I mean, we can both tackle it. But
well, you know, radio over IP has been used for years. You know, amateur radio operators have been doing this for over a decade now, including myself. I've had a radio IP station for several years, but you know, I don't know how soon that's going to penetrate the market. Now, I am hearing rumors that Motorola has some potential solutions for this. But I don't have anything concrete yet. I really don't know. I'm not. Maybe you know something more than I do, Greg.
And I want to qualify when we talk about ROIP, radio over IP. We've been used. I mean, that's even been used in the commercial world for a long time. I mean, if you look at your network, right, when we started in this business, the 7809 controllers, there was nothing IP about those things.
No.
Okay, the whole networks are IP based. But the thing is that we got security issues. I mean, we had Homeland Security come and speak at ABCO a while back about people hacking into P25 systems and setting up problems, for, man down alerts and weird things going on with P25 systems. So unfortunately, at that core level, it becomes a little bit more difficult to connect to the network at an IP-based level right now. So I don't think it's going to be something. I think what we need to do is look at other alternatives. Not that Motorola won't solve this or Motorola won't become have a solution for small cell, but we have to look at some other solutions prior to that.
Right.
And I think that's what they're asking. If you want to ask the question about ROIP, I think that's the question that's being asked.
And that may be, again, the modern day infrastructure is mostly IP based. So the traditional way that my radio technicians and myself learned, or several of my radio technicians, I feel like an old man now when I talk analog radio, and you actually took a tool and inserted it in a radio and turned a pot or a potentiometer. So people don't even know what that is these days. They look at me funny, like, what are you talking about? You don't hook the computer up and make a change. So my radio system is mostly IP based now. So I have some RF equipment that's attached to a server and a network. It's on a closed network. And so in a sense, it is radio over IP. The P25 signal is, well, I wouldn't say IP based, but it is a digital signal. So, I guess today we are really using radio over IP, but there's alternate methods to that. And I'm not sure how they reference that. I mean, I know there are radios being built today that can leverage a Wi-Fi system as they walk into a building. And if there's a connection back to my core, it will connect in and transmit out on the radio system. So that is available today.
Okay. You want to grab another one?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this one can go more towards chief. Kim Bernard asked, what's the best way to bridge the gap and educate the fire officials? So this is more about educating fire officials. A lot of our conversation is about educating the licensee or outreach to them, but what's the best way to educate the fire official to enforce a code that does not protect the radio network, but meets the code as written? An example is given as too strong of a signal that bleeds out of the building, and there's other issues as well. But what about a fire official who's sticking to his guns on, hey, this meets the code, so we're going to approve it, turn it up, and call it good, when it's not actually a healthy installation? So how do we reach out? How do we educate the fire officials? How do we communicate with them to get them on the same page as us?
Yeah, a lot of it is it starts with building relationships up front. When you're new to an area, you come in and going and meeting the fire official and building that trust factor is one of the most important things an integrator can do, is know who you're working with and spend time with them and educate. And the number one thing is don't ever lie to them, because they won't trust anything you're saying. When you build that trust, you can have that education and discussion standpoint. I use this example a lot of times. I had a very complex project come into our community that had an ultra high speed deluge sprinkler system. This sprinkler system utilized blasting caps so that you got water flowing in 15 milliseconds. And it had all these detection and flame detections and UV IR detectors, and I'd never seen one before. And here I am responsible for enforcing the code in it. And the sprinkler contractor came in, and I knew him from multiple jobs and worked with him. And I said, Johnny, have you ever put one of these in? I said, nope. He said, have you ever inspected one? I said, nope. I said, I guess we're going to learn this together. And we sat down and we researched and talked and learned all we could about doing this. And that's what's important for fire marshals and fire inspectors and integrators, is to come together and don't be ashamed to say, I don't know anything about this. I'm totally responsible for it, but I don't know anything about it, but I'm willing to learn. And that's the most important piece. Probably the single most important initiative we've done at the coalition is coming out this year, which is a I'll call it a resource guide, a study guide that we hope will be the Bible for in-building communications to help educate AHJs to understand some of these things that you're talking about, because there are situations where if you don't understand signal and simply say, no, you have to have it, it's the wrong thing to do. I consulted on a project not too long ago. It was the worst idea ever to put a solution into this particular building. But this document will help educate installers, integrators, anybody that does work with in-building emergency responder communication systems. So it's all about education and relationships. Get to know them, talk to them.
Yep.
Oftentimes people can't have anybody buy you lunch.
Yeah,
So they'll pay for their own lunch, but just be willing to meet with them. Go and offer a class. One of the things we miss right now with COVID and all the things that are going on is our lunch and learns that we do and get our AHJs involved. But we're doing a lot of that online. You guys can do the same thing. Sit down one-on-one and help them understand where it's coming from. Sit down with the frequency license holder and the fire marshal and the integrator and say, we've got a solution that has to be provided. What's the best one? So that's the best advice I can give you is build that relationship, educate.
Yeah, right on. 100% agree with that.
Absolutely. We're with you. That's some of the efforts here for sure. Do you guys have anything else you wanted to chime in with?
You want to answer a couple more, or we?
Well, I do have one from Nicholas Will. He wants to know, why is Greg Glenn called the DAS doctor? He wants to know where you studied.
I studied in getting beat up in the marketplace. Doing this for a long time. Yeah, I guess he also wants to know where the coolest place we ever installed remotes were.
I'd like to say 7 Leaves.
There we go. That's a pot farm. Anybody else? How about I could say the North Tower of the Golden Gate Bridge, up 700 foot. That kind of cool up there. We installed the system to cover the inside of the bridge structure so that guys could, run up and down inside there and paint and that sort of thing, work on the bridge.
That's pretty cool.
I think that's probably the coolest place. I could talk about sewage facilities, but those are more stinky than cool. But
Yeah, man. Let's not go there.
and Nate knows about that one too.
Oh, I've served my time at garbage trucks, sewage facilities, you name it. That's a tough place to work, man. A lot of respect for those folks.
Okay.
I'm trying to just scan through here real quick just to see if we have anything. I know it's been a lot of back and forth, which I do appreciate everybody that's been jumping on here and kind of talking back and forth. I think that's been pretty cool to watch and watch you all, that's communication there. Make sure you guys send that out to your friends and let them know about, the communication that we're trying to build around the industry and talk to each other. If we can bring people together, we're trying to do it from Pulse point of view, right? Trying to bring people together to answer these hard questions and make sure that we're all communicating with, it's communicating, but, with everybody. So make sure you spread it out. And then, do you see anything in there?
Oh, I was going to say, do we have any other questions you guys want to answer before we go ahead and type them in? I did have another one that said something, I think this was from Jesse Osborne, Parallel Technologies. He noticed about that the primary, he was talking about control channels on a trunk system, and I'm assuming that this is a Motorola system. Wanted to know why there's alternate and primary control channels. I think this is a holdover from the old days. The old original trunking systems always would select 4 channels, and it was, I can't go, I can go into the thought process, but basically they had 4 channels. And I think now, just as softwares move forward, that the systems are, you can actually assign what ones you want to be primary, so that if there's no interference on channel 1, I want channel 1 to be primary all day long. 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Whereas back in the original days when we were running 2 power amplifiers, you know, those ones that ran the 4C, whatever, 800 AU7s, they were hugely expensive tubes. You wanted to cycle through the control channel so that you didn't wear down a particular base station over time. So I think that the 4-channel thing is just a holdover from day one of trunking back when it was started. And now you have alternates and primaries, and that's just decided by the licensee may decide that they want to set it up that way, or they may rotate all through 4 of them. And I believe if you have EDAC systems, if there's any of those left, the old Harris systems, that you could actually have all of your channels be control channels.
I believe you're right. Yeah.
So that's where that one came from.
There's this one that came in from Richard with the Orange County government in Florida. It's long, but I guess my point to this is, if we're not answering these questions right now, we'll make sure that we get back and answer all of them. Absolutely. So just know that if your question's not getting answered.
Okay, so I think it's about time to wrap it up. We appreciate everybody that's been participating with us. I think that this is one of the steps towards solving this problem. So I think, there's a few different problems. There's people that aren't qualified out there installing, people that maybe we're trying to engage with, the stakeholders that aren't educated on this subject. So it's important, this community that we have, like the folks that are joining in with us here, the Safer Buildings Coalition, the work they're doing. There is expertise out there, although it is a little bit hard to come by these days, but the people that know what they're doing, it's important for them to be out educating, embrace this community, share the knowledge we have, and educate, because it's going to be good for all of us, bottom line, right? Even I'm working together out there educating, because if we don't do something about this, then this problem could balloon quite a bit and could potentially pop at some point, like Greg likes to talk about. So it's important for all of us as a community to make sure that this is being addressed. Everyone's being educated. We're trying to take more of a holistic approach, more of a future thinking approach versus just let's slap a Band-Aid on it now. So Pablo did ask, and it looks like he missed it on the can and during the video, but Tilted Mash is the brewing that provided the beer. I hope everybody enjoyed that. They got to participate. If you're in the Elk Grove area, anytime
My beer today, water.
if you're in the Elk Grove area, Elk Grove, Northern California,
Yes,
don't hesitate to stop in and visit our friend Jonathan at Tilted Mash Brewing.
They're awesome.
And cheers, everybody. And definitely make sure you subscribe to the channel. We're going to continue to do things like this. We're going to make them as interactive as possible. First 25 recipients always get free beer shipped out to them. Can I say that legally? We're going to get you some beer. We're going to get you some beer to drink with us. We're going to try to have some fun with it. I know sometimes we're getting into some technical topics, but let's try to make this as fun as possible. Let's make this enjoyable while we're getting educated. And thank you once again to Chief and to Nathan, to
Absolutely.
the SBC for all they're doing.
Yeah.
We appreciate
Thank you,
everyone's generosity
SBC.
of time. And hey, reach out to us if there's anything else you want to talk about in the near future. We'll be coming out with episode 3 in February. So thank you to everyone. We'll talk to you soon. Cheers.
All right, guys.
everybody.
Thank you.